Imagine this. Someone you love, someone small, defenseless, crying out for help. Not once, not twice, but for hours, days, and no one comes. Imagine their tiny hands reaching out, their body breaking under the weight of fists, boots, rage. Imagine them begging, apologizing for something they never did. Imagine their screams fading, not because help arrived, but because they simply had no more strength left to fight. And now, imagine being the person who heard it all and did nothing. Sick to your stomach? You should be, because this isn't a nightmare. This isn't a horror movie. This is real life. This is what happens in homes that look just like yours. To children who could be your own. To victims who never get to grow up. And worse, this happens every single day. Not in some distant country. Not in some forgotten slum. But right here, next door, across the street, maybe even in your own house. And when it does, most people do exactly what they do best. Nothing. Quick one, yeah. If the sound of that unsettles you, if it makes you question how such horrors unfold, you're not alone. These are the truths people often ignore, but here, we confront them head-on. Subscribe now to uncover more cases on my channel that demands to be heard. The facts won't change, but awareness can make all the difference. Let us head back into our story. In the quiet town of Argentine Township, Michigan, within Genesee County, a tragedy unfolded that would forever scar the community. Dominic Calhoun, a bright-eyed 4-year-old, became the silent victim of unimaginable cruelty, a victim whose cries for help went unheard, whose suffering was overlooked by those who should have protected him. Dominic's life began with the innocence and wonder typical of a child his age. He found joy in simple pleasures, dancing around the living room, clutching his favorite blankie, and basking in the love of his family. But beneath this veneer of normalcy lay a series of overlooked signs, subtle yet telling, that hinted at the horrors to come. His mother, Corinne Baker, had entered into a relationship with Brandon Hayes, a man whose presence would prove catastrophic. Hayes, burdened by financial strain and a volatile temper, resented the responsibility of caring for a child he did not father. This resentment festered, manifesting in anger that would soon be directed at young Dominic. Neighbors recall hearing unsettling noises from the apartment, a child's cries, thuds against walls, and muffled arguments. Yet, these auditory red flags were dismissed, attributed to the commonplace disputes of domestic life. No one imagined the extent of the nightmare occurring behind closed doors. Family members, too, noticed changes. Dominic's once cheerful demeanor became subdued. Bruises appeared on his small frame, explained away as typical childhood mishaps. During a visit to a dollar store, Brandon's own father observed severe burns on Dominic's hands and bruises on his head. He urged that the boy be taken to an emergency room, but this plea was tragically ignored. Corinne's parents, Julie and Martin Baker, sensed something amiss. They interacted with their daughter during the period of abuse, noting her unusual cheerfulness and frequent phone conversations with Brandon. Despite these interactions, Corinne never hinted at the torment her son was enduring. The most harrowing oversight came from Corinne herself. Battling her own demons, including substance abuse, she failed to act. Even as Dominic's condition deteriorated, vomiting, bleeding, and crying out in pain, she remained passive, perhaps paralyzed by fear or denial. Her inaction sealed her son's fate. In retrospect, the signs were glaring. A child's sudden withdrawal, unexplained injuries, and the palpable tension within the household were all indicators of a brewing storm. Yet, societal reluctance to intervene in private matters allowed these warnings to go unheeded. Dominic's story is a haunting reminder of the consequences of inaction. It underscores the imperative for communities to remain vigilant, to question, and to act when something seems amiss. The silent cries of a child should never be ignored, for they may be the only plea for help before it's too late. The sequence of events leading to this harrowing discovery began with a weekend marred by escalating violence. Brandon Hayes, the boyfriend of Dominic's mother, Corinne Baker, had subjected the young boy to relentless abuse over several days. The catalyst for this brutality was disturbingly trivial. Dominic had wet himself in the couch, an act that ignited Hayes's uncontrollable rage. Throughout this period, Dominic endured unimaginable torment. His small body bore the brunt of Hayes's fury, suffering injuries so severe that, according to neurosurgeon Dr. Jawad Shah, there was no spot on his body that was not badly beaten. Despite the severity of Dominic's condition, immediate intervention was tragically absent. Corinne Baker, paralyzed by fear and her own struggles with substance abuse, failed to seek help. Neighbors, too, reported hearing disturbing noises, thuds, cries, and arguments, but none took the crucial step of contacting authorities. It wasn't until Sunday, April 11th, that the true extent of Dominic's suffering came to light. A visitor to the apartment found Dominic unresponsive, his battered body a testament to the horrors he had endured. Emergency services were summoned, and Dominic was rushed to Hurley Medical Center in Flint, Michigan. Despite the medical team's valiant efforts, Dominic succumbed to his injuries the following day. The immediate reactions to this discovery were a mix of shock, horror, and profound sorrow. Law enforcement officials, seasoned in their duties, were visibly shaken. Genesee County Sheriff Robert Pickell remarked on the case's brutality, emphasizing the innocence of the young victim. The community of Argentine Township, and indeed the broader region of Michigan, was left grappling with the incomprehensible nature of the crime. Vigils were held, and makeshift memorials sprang up, as residents sought to process their grief and honor the short life of Dominic Calhoun. In the aftermath, pressing questions emerged. How could such abuse go unnoticed for days? Why did those who sensed something was amiss remain silent? These inquiries underscored the critical importance of vigilance and the moral imperative to act in the face of suspected abuse. Dominic's tragic end serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities that exist within our communities. It highlights the necessity for collective responsibility and the duty to protect the most innocent among us. The community grappled with a profound sense of loss and disbelief. As the initial shock subsided, attention turned toward those closest to the young boy, particularly his mother, Corinne Baker, and her boyfriend, Brandon Hayes. Their reactions and behaviors in the wake of Dominic's death raised unsettling questions and suspicions. Corinne Baker's demeanor. Corinne Baker, a 25-year-old mother, was known to her family and friends as someone who had faced her share of challenges. However, in the days following Dominic's death, her demeanor struck many as incongruent with the gravity of the situation. According to reports, Baker appeared detached and unemotional, a stark contrast to the expected grief of a mother who had just lost her child under such horrific circumstances. Family members, including Baker's own parents, Julie and Martin Baker, expressed their dismay and suspicion regarding their daughter's behavior. They recounted instances where Corinne had opportunities to seek help for Dominic, but failed to do so. In an interview, Julie Baker lamented, "Our little angel would still be here. I'll say this until the day I die." All she had to say is one word. Brandon Hayes' behavior. Brandon Hayes, 24, was identified as the primary perpetrator in Dominic's death. Described by authorities as a drug addict and dealer, Hayes exhibited aggressive and volatile behavior. In the days leading up to Dominic's death, neighbors reported hearing disturbing noises and cries from the apartment. Despite these alarming signs, Hayes continued his routine, showing no remorse or concern for the suffering child in his care. Investigations revealed that Hayes had a history of violence and substance abuse. His interactions with law enforcement painted a picture of a man with little regard for human life, especially that of a defenseless child. The community's suspicion towards Hayes was immediate and intense, as many struggled to comprehend how someone could commit such a heinous act. The broader community of Argentine Township and Genesee County, Michigan, was engulfed in a wave of grief and anger. Candlelight vigils were held in Dominic's memory, with residents expressing their sorrow and disbelief. The tragedy became a focal point for discussions on child abuse and the responsibilities of caregivers. Local authorities faced scrutiny as well. Questions arose about whether previous interactions with the family could have prevented the tragedy. The community demanded accountability and a thorough investigation to ensure that such an incident would never happen again. The media played a significant role in shaping public perception of the case. Detailed reports highlighted the brutal nature of Dominic's death and the alleged negligence of his caregivers. Public forums and social media platforms buzzed with discussions, with many expressing outrage and calling for justice. The case also sparked debates about systemic issues, such as the effectiveness of child protective services and the societal factors contributing to such tragedies. The collective grief and anger served as a catalyst for advocacy against child abuse and neglect. Legal proceedings and charges. In the wake of the investigation, both Corinne Baker and Brandon Hayes faced legal repercussions. Hayes was charged with first-degree murder and torture, reflecting the severity of his actions. Baker, on the other hand, was charged with second-degree murder and child abuse, accused of willfully disregarding her son's condition and failing to protect him. These charges underscored the legal system's recognition of both direct and indirect culpability in cases of child abuse. The community closely followed the proceedings, yearning for justice for Dominic. The tragedy of Dominic Calhoun's death forced a collective introspection within the community. It highlighted the critical importance of vigilance and intervention when signs of abuse are evident. The suspicions surrounding those closest to Dominic served as a stark reminder that the duty to protect vulnerable children often rests with those entrusted with their care. In the end, the whispers and lies that permeated this case revealed deep-seated issues of neglect, abuse, and systemic failures. The community's resolve to seek justice for Dominic became a testament to their commitment to safeguarding the welfare of all children in Michigan and beyond. The investigation unearthed a series of harrowing details that painted a grim picture of the events leading to his demise. The evidence collected not only highlighted the brutality of the crime but also revealed a web of negligence and complicity. Upon entering the apartment, investigators were confronted with a scene of unimaginable horror. The living space was in disarray, with signs of a violent struggle evident throughout. Bloodstains were found on the walls and furniture, indicating the severity of the assault on young Dominic. The couch, where it was believed much of the abuse took place, was soaked with bodily fluids, a testament to the prolonged nature of his suffering. The autopsy report was a crucial piece of evidence in building the case against Brandon Hayes. Dominic's body bore the marks of sustained and severe abuse. He had suffered multiple blunt force injuries, burns, and signs of being struck with objects. The medical examiner noted that the injuries were inflicted over several days, leading to his eventual death. This contradicted any claims that the injuries were accidental or the result of a single incident. The witness testimonies. Testimonies from neighbors and family members provided further insight into the events that transpired. Neighbors reported hearing prolonged periods of crying and loud noises coming from the apartment in the days leading up to Dominic's death. One neighbor recounted hearing Dominic pleading, "Mommy, make him stop," a chilling indication of the torment he was enduring. Family members testified about the dynamics within the household. Corinne Baker's parents revealed that they had seen Dominic with visible injuries prior to his death and had urged their daughter to seek medical attention for him. Their pleas were ignored, and Corinne's failure to act became a focal point in understanding the negligence that contributed to the tragedy. The inconsistencies in statements. During police interviews, Brandon Hayes provided conflicting accounts of the events. Initially, he claimed that Dominic's injuries were the result of accidental falls. However, under further questioning, his explanations became inconsistent, and he eventually admitted to disciplining Dominic, but denied the extent of the abuse. Corinne Baker's statements also raised suspicions. She claimed to be unaware of the severity of Dominic's injuries and insisted that she was afraid of Hayes, which prevented her from seeking help. However, evidence showed that she had multiple opportunities to escape or alert authorities, but chose not to, suggesting a deeper level of complicity. Digital evidence. Investigators examined digital evidence, including text messages and phone records, which provided additional context. Messages between Corinne and Brandon revealed discussions about disciplining Dominic, with Hayes expressing frustration towards the child. There were also messages where Corinne downplayed Dominic's injuries when communicating with concerned family members, further indicating her awareness and indifference to his suffering. The accumulation of physical evidence, witness testimonies, and digital records painted a comprehensive picture of the abuse that led to Dominic Calhoun's death. It became evident that this was not a singular act of violence, but a prolonged period of torture inflicted upon a defenseless child. The inconsistencies in the statements of both Brandon Hayes and Corinne Baker, coupled with the overwhelming evidence, solidified the case against them, leading to their eventual convictions. Sadly, as it is known that Dominic's life was brutally cut short in April 2010. The catalyst for this unimaginable violence was as trivial as it was horrifying. Dominic had wet himself in the couch. This minor childhood mishap ignited a fury in Hayes that led to days of torture and ultimately, Dominic's death. The abuse was not a sudden eruption but a sustained assault over several days. Hayes subjected Dominic to unimaginable cruelty, beating him with fists and objects, burning his tiny hands, and inflicting injuries so severe that medical professionals were left aghast. Dr. Jawad Shah, a neurosurgeon who treated Dominic, remarked, "I couldn't find a spot. There was no. Every spot on his body was badly beaten." Equally disturbing was the role of Corinne Baker, Dominic's mother. Investigations revealed that Baker was aware of the ongoing abuse. Consumed by drug use and fear of legal repercussions due to probation violations, she chose inaction over her son's safety. She left the apartment multiple times during the period of abuse, failing to seek help or alert authorities. Her parents, Julie and Martin Baker, expressed profound remorse, stating, "All she had to say is one word." The community, too, bore witness to signs of distress. Neighbors reported hearing Dominic's cries and pleas, yet no one intervened. A neighbor heard little Dominic say over and over, "Mommy, make him stop," recounted Genesee County Sheriff Robert Pickell. This collective silence contributed to the tragedy, highlighting a communal failure to protect the vulnerable. The aftermath of Dominic's death prompted intense scrutiny and soul-searching. How could such evil persist unnoticed? The case underscored the critical importance of vigilance and intervention. It served as a grim reminder that the facade of normalcy can conceal profound darkness, and that the responsibility to protect children extends beyond the immediate family to the broader community. In the wake of this tragedy, Dominic's story became a catalyst for change, emphasizing the need for heightened awareness and proactive measures to prevent such horrors from recurring. The evil that lurked behind closed doors in that Michigan apartment was a stark lesson in the consequences of inaction and the imperative of collective responsibility. The state of Michigan, USA, sought justice for the innocent life lost. The legal proceedings that ensued aimed to uncover the truth and hold those responsible accountable. Brandon Hayes, the primary suspect, was subjected to extensive interrogation by law enforcement. Initially, Hayes denied any wrongdoing, attempting to deflect blame and minimize his involvement in Dominic's injuries. However, as evidence mounted, his narrative began to falter. According to a detective's testimony, Hayes eventually confessed to the crimes, providing a handwritten apology note. Corinne Baker, Dominic's mother, also faced intense questioning. She claimed to have been unaware of the severity of the abuse inflicted upon her son. However, inconsistencies in her statements raised suspicions about her complicity and failure to protect her child. As the case progressed, questions arose regarding Hayes' mental state. His attorney requested a psychiatric evaluation to determine his competency to stand trial, citing previous instances of paranoid delusions. Despite these claims, Hayes was found competent, allowing the trial to proceed. Baker faced charges related to her neglect and failure to act, with prosecutors arguing that her inaction contributed to Dominic's prolonged suffering. Her parents publicly expressed their belief that she bore partial responsibility for the tragedy, emphasizing that she had opportunities to seek help but remained silent. During the trial, the courtroom became a battleground of emotions and revelations. Witnesses recounted the horrors endured by Dominic, painting a grim picture of the events leading to his death. Hayes' confession and Baker's perceived indifference were central to the prosecution's case. The defense attempted to mitigate Hayes' culpability by highlighting his mental health issues, but the overwhelming evidence of deliberate and sustained abuse overshadowed these arguments. Baker's defense faced the challenge of countering claims of her negligence and failure to protect her son. The verdicts and sentencing. Ultimately, the jury found Brandon Hayes guilty of multiple charges, including first-degree murder and child abuse. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Corinne Baker entered a plea agreement, acknowledging her failure to protect Dominic. She received a prison sentence, reflecting her role in the tragic events. The legal proceedings surrounding Dominic Calhoun's death underscored the importance of accountability. The confrontations during interrogations and in the courtroom revealed the depths of human failure and the devastating consequences of inaction. This chapter serves as a somber reminder of the necessity for vigilance and the moral imperative to protect the most vulnerable among us. The state of Michigan was compelled to confront the systemic failures that allowed such a heinous act to occur. The public outcry was not just a reaction to the brutality of the crime, but also a demand for meaningful change to prevent future tragedies. Dominic's family, particularly his paternal grandfather, Rick Calhoun, became vocal advocates for legal reform. They channeled their grief into a mission to strengthen Michigan's child protection laws. Their relentless efforts culminated in the introduction and eventual passage of Dominic's Law. This legislation aimed to impose harsher penalties on individuals convicted of child abuse, especially in cases resulting in severe injury or death. In March 2014, the Flint Journal reported on the first application of Dominic's Law. A mother and her boyfriend were sentenced under this new statute after a 3-year-old boy was hospitalized with extensive injuries, including bruises, cracked ribs, and a brain injury requiring surgery. The mother received a sentence ranging from nearly 6 to 21 years in prison, while her boyfriend was sentenced to 14 to 21 years. This case underscored the law's intent to hold not only perpetrators but also negligent guardians accountable. The unanimous passage of Dominic's Law by the Michigan House was a testament to the state's commitment to protecting its youngest residents. The legislation increased penalties for child abusers, reflecting a societal acknowledgement of the need for stricter deterrence. However, the implementation of Dominic's Law also highlighted the complexities inherent in legislative reform. While the law provided a framework for increased penalties, its effectiveness depended on consistent enforcement and public awareness. The tragic necessity of its first application served as a somber reminder that legislation alone cannot eradicate child abuse. A cultural shift towards vigilance and proactive intervention is equally essential. Beyond legal reforms, Dominic's case spurred discussions about the responsibilities of community members and professionals in reporting suspected abuse. It became evident that preventing such tragedies requires a collective effort, encompassing not only legal measures but also education, support systems, and a commitment to safeguarding children. Reflecting on Dominic's legacy, one must consider whether justice was truly served. While the perpetrators were held accountable and laws were strengthened, the loss of an innocent life is an irreplaceable void. The true measure of justice lies in the prevention of future tragedies, ensuring that Dominic's story serves as a catalyst for enduring change. In my opinion, Dominic Calhoun's death was not merely another headline. It was a profound tragedy that prompted introspection and reform within Michigan. His legacy is etched in the legal changes enacted and the heightened awareness of child abuse. Yet, the journey towards justice is ongoing, demanding continual vigilance, compassion, and action from all members of society.